India's shrimp industry has transformed dramatically over the last decade. We use SPF broodstock, we have approved hatcheries, and we work with one of the world's best genetics. And yet, shrimp disease continues to cost Indian farmers hundreds of millions of dollars every year. So today's question is not whether genetics works. The real question is why isn't the system around this working well enough? And to unpack that, I'm joined by someone who have spent decades inside the system. Adam Banaszak is a seasoned aquaculture executive with deep expertise across shrimp genetics, animal nutrition, and commercial aquaculture systems in Asia Pacific. And most recently, Adam served as Chief Commercial Officer in Aqua, and before that, he held senior leadership roles at Novus International and True Nutrition. What makes Adam's perspective especially valuable is that he doesn't see himself genetics as a silver bullet. He sees it as a foundation, one that only works when farmers know how to use it and when the system around them is aligned. So, Adam, if genetics is the foundation, why does the system built on it still breaking? Or why does the system built on it keeps breaking?
Sure. Welcome. Thank you for having me, first of all. And maybe a small disclaimer before we unpack this question is, I just resigned and wrapped up my role in SciAqua end of December. So any comments that I make right now is purely my own, and I do not represent any company at the moment. So that's, I think, important for the listeners and the viewers of this discussion to know. And secondly, the decades experience is a lot saying that. It's actually a little bit less than that. But indeed, I've spent the last couple of years in the livestock segment and in genetics, most recently in shrimp. All of that experience comes from Asia Pacific. So I traveled quite extensively around Asia and just recently also including India, specifically for the shrimp industry. So that's where the observations are coming from. I have not spent years in genetics in shrimp, but I have used my time quite intensely. So I hope I can share some perspectives here. If there's anything that the viewers or listeners have a different opinion, then I think it's good that we have that conversation, and I'm open to any constructive criticism. So that's the disclaimers that I wanted to add in the beginning. Coming to your question, I think the way the industry looks at genetics is potentially different from where the person speaking is sitting, right? So if you ask genetics companies, if you ask hatcheries, if you ask processors and farmers, each of them will have a different perspective. I think India is unique in that sense that the understanding of the genetics and which genetics works and which genetics is being stocked in the pond is actually very high. This is due to the regulatory reasons and the public information being shared by the authorities on which genetics is imported by who and when and in what amounts. So I would say the farmers are very, very well aware of the genetics, and they have a strong preference as well for which genetics they want and what they believe works in their ponds and what doesn't. So that's quite unique for India.
Okay, so I want to reference Jim Weibin. He's one of the pioneers of SPF shrimp and the founder of Marine Genetics, who recently wrote in Hatchery Feed and Management, article, and he makes a very clear point there that SPF alone is no longer enough. The shrimp industry scaled fast on biosecurity and growth, But that model is now fragile because of genetic concentration, disease pressure, and production volatility. What do you have to say on that?
So we need to remember that SPF stands for specific pathogen free, right? And that means it can only be referencing the pathogens that we know and we have identified as being pathogenic for the shrimp culture. So this does not mean that this is all of the potential problems and pathogens that the shrimp might encounter in their life cycle, right? So I would say, and I think I just recently read something similar to what you're referencing, is that SPF is the foundation. It's many customers or many people in the industry treat it as a given. I think it's not a given, and we should cherish that standard that we have developed so far in being able to produce SPF larvae that goes into the ponds. And it is an important foundation. It is not a silver bullet that will solve all the challenges that may arise in the later stages of the culture.
So, in order to stay relevant amidst all the crises that we are seeing in the industry, what do you think, apart from SPF, what other characteristics does the broodstock need to have?
Sure. So a successful culture or a successful shrimp industry definition would be that we have good genetics, which some will say is 20-25% of the success factors. Then we have the feed, which is another that maybe a little bit more. The debate is open, and I know that many people in the industry have different opinions, but we have genetics, we have feed, we then have environmental factors, and we do have a little bit of luck as well that's needed for a successful culture. So if we look at that success factors, and then we reference that to the industry that we have, and speaking specifically about India, there is a level of integration in India, maybe not as much as it is in other places, but these factors need to be referenced in. One thing that, even if the successful culture starts from genetics, it still we need to remember the genetic code of the shrimp that we put into culture is setting the potential, right? So genetic is giving us the genetic potential. Then the question is, how do we maximize it for the best output at the end of the day? And best not meaning the fastest growth or the most resilient, but best in the term of the best possible outcome, which can also mean the less risky, the most sustainable. In many different ways we can define that success, but the genetics sets the potential. The deployment, so to speak, is giving us the performance.
So I have not got my answer yet. What is missing for genetics to work? What exactly is missing, and what we need to ensure that it gets deployed, uh, you know, the way it should be.
So I think what is missing is saying that there is something missing. I think if we look at the past few years of the industry in India specifically, since we're talking about that, I think it has seen growth, right? And so we cannot say that something is missing. There's always things that we could be doing better, I think, and that's also something that we can talk about. What are the things that we could do potentially better in India specifically for the industry to develop even more. But saying that something is missing is implying that something is not working. I think if we look at the history of the industry and where it started and where is it now, and what kind of challenges the Indian shrimp industry has been facing over 2025, which was definitely not an easy year, it's still ending up with a terrific result. So the question is not what I would reframe the question as, not what is missing, but what can we do better to achieve an even better outcome at the end of the day. And I think that the answer to that question is more collaboration across the value chain. And what that could bring is for one, you have the genetic companies, never mind which one we're specifically referencing here. But then you have the feed companies, then you have the processors and the farmers. And each of these players in this value chain, they know their product very well, and they know their know-how, they have their know-how, they have their technology, they have the potential that they want to set for the genetics, for the feed, and for how farms are being managed. I think by extracting the best out of each of these, let's say, elements of the supply chain, you can accomplish a better result. And the only way to do that is by collaborating, because where all of these elements come into play at the end of the day is the farm. And this is, I believe, the missing link, maybe if we want to call it like that, is translating all of that know-how that all of these supplying companies have, the hatcheries have, the feed companies, the additive companies, is how do we translate that into the environment of the farmers that are operating independently and culturing shrimp, and how to help them improve their yields in the best way possible. That's, I think, the challenge that stands in front of the country's shrimp industry.
Okay, so like we said that the missing link here is that hatcheries need to transfer the technical know-how to the farmers, right? And so this knowledge is supposed to come from hatcheries and other supply chain actors, right? And
yeah, I would say that the biggest responsibility in transferring this know-how from whichever part, from the genetics or the feed or the additives, should be on the parties that have the most stake in it, right? And the ones that have the most capital and potential to actually deliver that message to the standalone farms, to educate the farmers and to help them by understanding their challenges and bringing solutions that can help them accomplish better outcomes.
yeah, because we cannot expect farmers to operate under thin margins and expect them to bear high biological risk, right? And expect them to interpret genetic traits on their own. Because once
Correct.
something is sold, if performance collapses, who is accountable in an ideal system? And how different is that approach from India today?
Sure. Well, so there's a few questions in what you're referencing now. I think maybe to structure it a little bit, I think the discussion around who's responsible is like every party is responsible for their own part of the value chain, right? And I think nobody wants to take responsibility for things they don't control. So naturally, the processor or the hatchery will be limited in taking responsibility for what's happening on the farm, since they cannot really control the conditions that are present there, the biosecurity measures and the pond preparation in itself, for instance. So the things that they are beyond their control, they will not want to claim responsibility for that. But at the same time, everyone in this value chain is interested in making the other players better. And I think talking to many people in India, especially during WAS last time when I was there, I can feel that everybody understands that concept, that this is all interlinked. So I don't see this missing in the discussions that I've been having in India. I think everybody understands that in order for the whole industry to be successful, they all need to support each other at different stages of that value chain. And of course, it's business, right? So everybody wants to make money along the way. But I think the understanding is there that if the hatchery delivers bad quality PL, they understand that if the farm fails, eventually it will be their problem as well, right? So I can feel that there is a lot of understanding in all of the interlink dependencies between these players in the market right now.
But what I feel is that it needs to be a structured pilot wherein every stakeholder is taking the responsibility and is taking the ownership. That is what is important. And the success story of one of the pilots has to be disseminated to multiple pilots. And that's how the system will start to establish going forward.
Agree, but I think before we establish a system, which ultimately it should be the goal, and I think the elements of that system being put in place, like the event that's taking place today, actually, and the other events that are organized in India, they all have this as an objective. The thing is, because of the vastness of the country and the industry in India itself, it's just difficult to have that link and to reach every farmer with that kind of knowledge. So what I've seen so far is that the farmers that have more, let's say, land power, or the bigger businesses that can leave that business to someone who will run it for them while they're attending a conference like this, then they of course have access to this kind of knowledge. The others maybe not so much. So when we're thinking about building a system, that's I think the missing link. But before we get to that system build out, I think what's more important is to have a look at the data. So what really are the issues? What is the performance that we're getting from the farms right now, and how that can link back and create a feedback loop to provide that kind of information, not only for the genetic companies, but for all the stakeholders in the industry. And currently there is not so much of a, let's say, data collection system being put in place, not only for the genetic side. And I know, my previous company, Aqua, we were pretty adamant about how much data we want to collect. But I think it's for everybody in the industry that should be interested in really capturing the real data set, because only then the solutions that can be provided will be actually relevant for the actual situation, not the perception, but what the data speaks for itself objectively, without any prejudices that it's either genetics or the feed or the farm management. When you have the data and you understand the actual situation, it will be easier to create a system that supports the gaps that are there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And to further elaborate on this, I want to ask you a question. That can you walk us through what daily work inside a genetics center actually looks like? What are you kind of measuring, selecting, and worrying about every day?
Sure. So first of all, disclaimer again. For one, I cannot share any confidential information. That's one. And secondly, I'm not a geneticist myself, so there may be gaps in what I'm about to say. But I think taking this question to a little bit higher level, I think what genetics companies want to accomplish is they want to provide the best genetics that delivers the best outcomes for the shrimp industry. Now, how they do it is a different story, probably from one to another, but overall, it basically comes down to creating a lot of research into going into specific traits that they want to develop. So if you're looking for a growth, predominantly growth genetics, then of course this is the trait that you will be focusing on in your research and creating the next generations of the shrimp. If you want to have a more resilient, then you will focus on that. What I see in general is that we have companies in the genetic space that are following that line. So they have specific lines for specific use cases, a growth line or a more resilient line. And you have companies that are going into the balanced direction, such as the company that I used to work for. Definitely having a line that is more balanced, that is more challenging, because if you need to select for a few traits at the same time, then of course the whole research becomes more expensive and more difficult to execute at the end of the day and to deliver to the market. But again, what it comes back to is the data, right? Because if the genetics company does not understand how the genetic actually performs and in what conditions, what kind of challenges are the shrimp facing in the culture, then it will be incredibly difficult to create a product or the traits that will actually perform. So that's why it's critical for those data loops to be created and to work efficiently, because otherwise the industry may miss something that is happening in the field that has not been seen by the genetics companies, and that may create potentially a catastrophic event that knock on some wood doesn't happen. But these data points are important for the genetic companies to improve their products. And I think one more insight that we have been discussing in the past as well was around, having genetics for a specific market. And I told you that then, and I can repeat the same now on video, is that I do not really believe in specific country genetic lines, simply because of the reason of how much money it takes to develop a genetic line and to maintain it and to run it properly. It's extremely challenging to do that with a line for a specific country. And anyway, considering the differences in the culture performed in different countries, it's not that different as we think. So from a genetics point of view, I don't really see the benefits of having a specific line for a specific country.
Okay. So like you said that we don't have enough data coming back or feeding into the system where genetic companies can actually improve the performance, right? So
Correct.
till now we do not have enough data. It means that the genetics is not improving. It is under learning, right? And it does. Can we say that is it the reason for the repeated disease failures? Like, can we say that this is one of the reasons why we have disease failures? Of course, there are other reasons also that will come into the picture. But can we say that?
No, so I would not agree with that statement. And the reason why is the fact that we don't have a complete data loop with the pond data being fed into the system later on with the feed companies, with the genetic companies to really understand how their products are performing. That doesn't mean that these companies are just sitting blindly and not doing anything, right? There is a lot of research ongoing anyway. It's just that when you're doing research as a feed company or a genetics company, and trying to understand how your product will perform in commercial conditions, you can run certain trials. You can also run commercial trials, of course. It all takes money, but it doesn't mean that they're not doing anything to test the product and to understand how they can improve it. Otherwise, we would not be sitting here today discussing the shrimp industry, because probably it would not have developed if that was not the case. What I'm saying is, with these data loops being more complete, and the more data is being provided from actual farm situations and conditions, the better the advancement will be. So there will still be advancement, but if we want to make it better and faster, then that's the way to do it.
Okay, great. What is genomic selection?
Oh, that's a question for a geneticist, not really a commercial guy like me. But yeah, it's the latest advancement of the genetic selection tools that genetic companies use in order to improve their genetic lines as they develop.
So genomic selection, I was just reading about it, and it's already being used in shrimp, not as future technology, but as an operating system.
Correct.
Thousands of DNA markers across the genome, right, with real farm performance.
Correct. That's why I'm saying it costs a lot of money to run a genetics company, because without the genetics company doesn't have a product, right? So if the genetics company wants to stay relevant and stay in the market, they need to invest in these kind of exercises and keep improving the way they think about genetics and how to improve it. And the traits that they measure spans across thousands of possibilities that need to be considered. The biggest challenge actually is making it repeatable, because you can get lucky and create something that is performing very well, at least let's say in a trial condition. But then the question is, how do you actually make it repeatable and deliver that genetic line then to some of these markets that are spread around the whole world? That is another challenge that stands in front of the genetics companies. But in terms of delivering that, I think the genetics companies have developed already quite a lot, and India is an example where broodstock is being imported, and the whole system is designed so that it works. It supports the industry. So I don't really see the challenges in here, but certainly on the investment side, to keep the genetics development going is a difficult challenge for sure.
Right. So genomic selection, as you said, it will only work efficiently when farm data flows continuously back into the breeding program, right? And without that data, even the best genetic lines are not weak. They are simply underinformed by local farm reality, isn't it? And that's why we're discussing about collaboration, about doing pilots, so that we can produce efficient results in terms of survival or disease resistance, stress tolerance, and even yield.
So the genetics companies will manage by themselves even without this data, right? Because of the advancement in terms of genetics understanding and processes like genomic selection, they will figure this out themselves. The question is, can we do it better if we give the genetic companies the data that we have based on the farm's performance and the actual conditions that can sometimes be more challenging than whatever you can design in trial, or can be a mix of elements that are very difficult to replicate in a trial. So it's always better to have more farm data and actual performance data rather than just the trials that you can do. But even without the data, the genetic companies and the feed companies that they design new recipes for feeds, they will also be able to manage with their own research facilities and trials. It's just that if we give them more data from the actual conditions, then it will speed up the development for sure.
Okay, okay. So, Adam, farmers don't fail on growth, they fail on survival, right? Mortality destroys farm economics, not slow growth. Do you think the industry has focused too much on fast growth under ideal conditions and not enough on how shrimp perform when conditions are not so perfect, like on most Indian farms?
Yeah, so this is an interesting topic, and especially looking at India and how the market looks like there, because in economy you can say that the markets will always realign, right? The demand and supply will always meet somewhere at some point, and then everything else will follow. I believe this is the same for genetics. So coming to your question, when you're saying about growth lines or resilient lines or mix of both in a balanced scenario, I think the markets decide for themselves. So if the farmer sees that the growth line is no longer performing as intended for multiple reasons or whatever the reasons may be, and the resilient line is also not performing, then they will start looking for something else, right? And I believe that's exactly what happened in India over the last few years, where the market was looking for something that will work in the conditions that are there. And once they figured it out, then they will go all in on that. The risk, of course, is that it will keep rebalancing itself because the conditions will change, the market requirements will change, even the pricing conditions are also fluctuating quite a lot, right? So shrimp is a global industry, very much interlinked and interconnected, which means that whatever the pricing conditions are on the global market will very quickly reflect on the farm gate prices that the farmers see. So it will keep rebalancing itself. I don't think there is one silver bullet that will solve all the issues that are there, but the farmers are savvy enough to understand what's working for them and their specific case, and they will try to find different solutions to that problem that will eventually work for them.
So, Adam, when you say that the farmers are savvy enough, they know, their problems and they know how to figure out and they have solutions, then why we do have disease problems coming every now and then? There must be something that they are missing, and someone have to make them understand and close that knowledge gap.
Exactly. That's the point that I didn't get to yet, was that in order for them to be able to choose between different solutions and to be able to understand what's happening to their farm and why, for instance, if they're failing, why they're failing, right? They need the know-how, the knowledge transfer that comes from all of these stakeholders in the supply chain. So the farmer by himself will not know exactly what may have caused the crop failure. But given support and given testing, for instance, from the feed company or from the genetics company or the hatchery, to understand what was the issue and then find a solution together for that issue, will eventually rebalance the market. So that's what I meant. So on the higher scale of things, we can say that the market will rebalance itself, but in order for that to happen, the knowledge gap and the loop needs to be closed. So the farmer needs to get the support from the knowledgeable participants in that value chain.
This is the time to do it. We cannot afford to lose any more time because our shrimp industry is at the crossroads currently. And that's why we are discussing about collaboration, doing pilots. So when we are talking about pilots and collaboration, can we also discuss about how should each supply chain actor responsibility should be? Like what should be the responsibility of each of these stakeholders, in the supply chain, to be able to work cohesively and to help each other achieve the outcomes. For example, genetic companies can define performance envelopes and feed learning back into the selection, right? Hatcheries can guarantee biosecurity and seed integrity. Farmers can commit to SOPs, discipline, and basic digital data capture, right? And processors can provide them market linkage, incentives, and maybe offtake assurance. I don't know about that. But once the results are visible, risk becomes measurable and everybody in the system becomes accountable. And when risk is measurable, finance becomes possible, contracts become longer. One pilot becomes 10 pilots. And of course, buyer trust becomes structural. What do you have to say on that?
Sure. First of all, let's not sound too idealistic in what we're proposing for the industry to be doing. And anyway,
But this is already happening in Ecuador. I mean,
sorry.
but this is already happening in Ecuador. How is Ecuador doing? Ecuador.
Yeah.
How are they doing it? I mean, they have scaled from 200,000 to 1.2 million tons in a decade while containing disease pressure, right?
Sure.
How are they doing it?
Yeah, so maybe let's zoom out a little bit out of India and see the bigger picture, the global picture. I think when we think about the competitiveness of the industry in India versus what's happening in the world, of course, Ecuador comes to mind and their domination in shrimp exports. The model that they use is different with high level of integration that they use. And the way I see it for myself, although I have not been in Ecuador, so again, a small disclaimer, but looking at the industry there, they are distributing the risk in the supply chain, right? And that's how they manage the situation, and that's how they manage their production. So can we repeat that? Probably not. And should it be repeated? I don't know. And it doesn't mean that one model will work if we take it from one country and put it in another country. That doesn't mean that the model will work exactly in the same way as we think it will. So I think it's better to look at the system that we have and how we can improve that. And that comes back to your question about, who should be accountable for what. I think, again, I said it before, is that I think the participants in that supply chain that have the most at stake should take the most responsibility. And so does that mean that the processors, the hatcheries, the genetic companies, I'm not in a position to say who should do that, but definitely a higher level of collaboration that will lead to better education on the farm side is what is needed for the industry to become better at delivering sustainable and predictable results. Because at the end of the day, the farmers, are they looking for quick money, or are they looking for a sustainable income that sustains a livelihood of themselves and their families? I think for India, at least the farmers that I met were in that second category. And so how can we help them improve on that and become more predictable, which will then lead to less financial strain in the whole system, with less risk being put, especially in the feed business that is usually crediting the farms a lot, but also creating more predictability for the processors in how much shrimp they can expect, and so that they can be more predictable in signing their contracts for exports. And that's all interlinked. But who should be the one taking responsibility for organizing this collaboration? I'm not the one to say, and especially not being part of the industry in India itself, I don't feel like I have the authority to say that. But definitely, higher level of collaboration leading to more farmer education would be the way to go if I was asked for an opinion.
Correct, absolutely. Fragmentation helped India grow, right? And this is, we always say that, we, this is our diversity, right? So this is our competitive edge. And of course, fragmentation has helped India grow, but it will not help India survive the next phase, because fragmentation is, what you say, is the diagnosis. It is not the defense, right? So if we
Mm-hmm.
want resilience, if we want predictability, and if we want global relevance, we have to move from selling out, selling inputs, right, to owning outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, as as long as we have been discussing on genetics, genetics sets the potential, but systems decides who lasts it, isn't it? So yeah.
Indeed, and I think this could be done in a pilot mode, so to speak, right? And I think the fragmentation, as you said, is what helped India grow to a level it is today, because just the fact that the risk was spread out across a fragmented industry, that even if one element failed, then still the whole system was surviving. I think that's what carried the industry to now. I think an possible approach could be in a piloted mode scenario, where these kind of more local initiatives of collaboration could be taken as an example to then be rolled out in a larger phase rollout. But all of the stakeholders in the value chain would need to collaborate on that. And I think that's where the tricky part of this lies, is how do we create that kind of system and mindset where all of the players, despite their differences and different interests, instead of blaming each other, play together to deliver that value. It's extremely challenging, and there is no country that has a solution to this. It's a process that every industry in each country has to go through by themselves.
Because if everyone benefits, everyone must own outcomes. You said different they may have different interests. I think interest is same. Everybody's interest is same to safeguard themselves. And in order to safeguard themselves, the only solution left is to come together, share the
In,
responsibility. Because if everybody is benefiting, then everybody must be a part of the outcome. They must own the outcome.
Indeed, in an ideal scenario and looking at the whole industry in the country, definitely that's the right approach. And I think there's a lot of people that understand that and look at it the same way as you're describing it. But still, I mean, it takes a lot of leadership and a lot of charisma also to convince a larger audience to do this kind of thing and think about the bigger picture, meaning not how we compete with our neighbor, so to speak, but more in how we create the stronger industry together so that we can compete maybe not between ourselves in the country, but more with the outside world and the total global shrimp market. I think that is the root, let's say, challenge that stands in front of the industry and how the collaboration can be formed in order to deliver that.
You said that someone who has leadership quality and has charisma. Do I have that charisma?
Yeah, for sure. I think you're trying to get that.
You said right that let's not sound philosophical. When it comes to discussing about all these issues, I sound philosophical. You know why? Because when I see other countries doing pilots, when I see other countries collaborating, when I see other companies sharing the responsibility, when I see other countries having that mindset that has made them the forward oriented or future progressive companies, then why can't we, you know?
I agree. I think it's fantastic that you're looking at it that way, and you want the industry to work together to improve the whole supply chain, the whole value chain for everyone that's participating. Keep in mind, from my perspective, looking at many different markets, it's frequently a situation where you're when you're in one specific country or industry, it's you look at it very critically because you want it to improve, right? But looking at the bigger picture of many different places that they are struggling the same way, or maybe not in the same way, but they are struggling with their own challenges, right? So I think overall it's not as bad as it maybe sounds, especially looking at the hard data coming out of the market and how India's shrimp industry has dealt with the challenges in 25 is again amazing. So, but that doesn't mean that there's no room for improvement. And I hear what you're saying. I think it's fantastic that you're having these voices, and it's not only you. There's other people that I don't want to name anyone specifically, but we all know who they are, that are voicing the same message and trying to engage more collaboration in the industry to make it stronger and to make it better for all the participants, including also the domestic consumption, which I think is also an interesting topic that still stands as an ambition in front of the industry in India to drive more domestic consumption that will make it more resilient to changes in the global market. I think it's one of the examples that that we can bring up that's already happening.
Right, you got me. You understand the purpose of the discussion that we're having. It's so important, right? And every change starts with a conversation, and the conversation that we are doing is so apt and relevant. So, Adam, if India genuinely fixes the genetics, biosecurity, and data loop in the next 5 years, what changes first? Is it the disease cycle, the farmer confidence? What is it that changes first? And okay, and how should success be measured? Not in volume, but in resilience.
Yeah, I think it's good starting from the measurement of the success. I think a good measure of success will be value, not volume in itself. And value understood as the value that is created in the whole supply chain, the whole value chain. Because then everybody participates in that value, right? If only the processors are making money, then probably the whole industry is not sustainable. So everyone has to participate in that. But I would say we should measure it by value. Now, how genetics plays a role in that, I would say it has an equally important role to play in that as every other part of the value chain, be it feed, additives, farm management practices, hatchery operations that are actually delivering the genetics to the farm. They all have a very important role to play. And I wouldn't bet it on one piece of that value chain. As we said in the beginning, the genetics is the foundation and it sets the potential. But then the deployment part, meaning starting in terms of India from hatchery basically to a processor, the deployment is where the performance and the value comes from. So it is a foundation, it's important, but all the other elements of the value chain creating the success of the shrimp industry are equally important, I would say, in making sure that we have a sustainable, and not only in environmental terms, but sustainable economically also for all the participants, shrimp industry in India.
Right. Because success in today's context is not volume. We have volume. It is predictability. It's the mindset. It's a discipline. That is our success, right? And if we achieve that level of success, it means that is the time when we can say then the world will be able to see better survival rates, disease losses coming down, better feed conversion ratios, and a better understanding between supply chain actors, and more pilots, more collaborations taking place. So what we need to understand that success cannot be measured in volume. It is
Right.
the understanding that in today's difficult times, we as an industry needs to stand together and have the right mindset, have the right discipline, so that we can show the world that our produce is predictable, our quality is predictable, our outcomes are consistent, isn't it?
Indeed, and it comes from, as I said, many elements in the whole process, right? So, of course, genetics, but at the same time, harvesting procedures, feeding regimes, water quality actions that farmers need to take. All of these things play a role in making the industry more sustainable economically and environmentally at the same time as well, right? Because if we do not waste the feed, for instance, by overfeeding, we do not degrade the water quality, we don't have to use that many additives in the water, we have higher survival rates, less vibrios. It's an interconnected system. So all of these elements play a role. And I think, again, coming back to the main topic, I think is how do we bring that know-how from all of these different stakeholders in the industry and make sure that that know-how is being applied in the farm operations where the magic and the growth really happens, is the challenge for the industry.
Any closing message, Adam?
No, thank you for that discussion. I hope I was able to bring some ideas and to share my perspective. Again, if there is anything that the industry would like to discuss or challenge some of my ideas, I'm always open to that. And I think the dialogue is what makes us better. And everybody can bring their ideas to the table, and then we can sit down together and discuss what is the best way forward. If I can help in any way based on my experience, then I'm happy to do that. So thank you for asking these questions, and I hope it was insightful.
Thank you, Adam. And I feel that it is one of my most honest and most spontaneous and most philosophical podcast so far. I thoroughly enjoyed having this discussion with you, and uh, I hope we don't have to edit anything from this podcast. It just went so much in the flow.
Good. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you so much. And my final message, okay? Again, philosophical. Um, the shrimp industry is at crossroads. One path is fragmented, reactive, and high risk. The other is integrated, where genetics, data, biosecurity, and markets work together to create resilience. The future of shrimp industry or Indian shrimp farming is not about faster growth. It's about predictable survival, consistent quality, and shared responsibility. It's about building systems that can survive uncertainty season after season. Ecuador shows us something very clearly. Genetics does not win alone, systems do. And if everyone benefits, then everyone must own the outcomes. Thank you for watching this podcast. Stay tuned until I'm back with my next episode. Bye bye.